Episode 4. Shadows of the canyon, the Nevada desert sprawled beneath the unrelenting midday sun. A vast expanse of golden sands, shimmering like a sea of molten glass, rippling with heat waves that distorted the jagged horizon where the canyon loomed like a dark promise. The air was thick with the dry scent of sagebrush and the faint, lingering temps of damp earth from the gulch's receded floodwaters, a muddy scar winding through the landscape like a serpent's trail. The sun hung high, its rays beating down, with a fierce intensity that turned the sand into a furnace, casting long, wavering shadows that danced across the dunes. Jacob Kane trudged at the forefront, his weathered boots sinking into the softened ground with each laborious step, the leather creaking softly under the strain. His silver-streaked black hair was damp with sweat, the moisture tracing rivulets. Down his scarred face, a map of battles past etched into his skin. His shoulder, grazed by a bullet in the Gulch fight 2 days prior, throbbed beneath the frayed fabric of his worn cotton shirt, a dull ache that pulsed with every movement, reminder of the price of survival. Yet his Winchester rifle hung ready at his side, its polished barrel glinting faintly in the harsh light, a constant companion that grounded him in the chaos of the present. Beside him, Nita limped slightly, her leg bandaged with a strip of cloth, torn from the hem of her traditional Navajo dress, the fabric now a muted patchwork of red and brown from the desert's relentless dust. The bandage, hastily tied during their escape from the Gulch, was stained with the sweat of their journey, but it held firm, a testament to her resilience. Her dark eyes, sharp and unyielding, scanned the horizon with a mix of hope and wariness. Her posture upright despite the strain that tightened her muscles. The cut on her arm, a shallow graze from the same battle, had scabbed over, the dried blood flaking away to reveal tender pink skin beneath. But the memory of the bullet that had pierced her leg lingered in the slight hitch of her gait. She carried no weapon now, her dagger sheathed at her waist, its hilt worn smooth by her grip, a silent promise of the fights yet to come. Behind them, the Navajo women followed, their footsteps light but determined, a silent procession against the vastness of the desert. Shima led the group, her silver hair glinting like threads of moonlight caught in the sunlight, each strand a story of survival woven into her being. Her small bow, its wood darkened by years of use, was slung over her shoulder, the string taut, and ready, a quiet sentinel of her skill. Her face, lined with the wisdom of decades, held a quiet strength, her eyes scanning the terrain with the precision of a seasoned tracker. Missing nothing, not the flicker of a lizard in the sand, nor did the distant shimmer of heat on the horizon. Owi, the young girl, barely 16, walked close to Shima, her arms cradling her newborn with a tenderness that belied the harshness around them. The child's soft coos rose and fell with the rhythm of her steps, a fragile melody that pierced the desert's silence, its tiny face nestled against her chest, eyes closed in a peaceful slumber that seemed a miracle amid the danger. Tala and Kiona flanked the group, their daggers sheathed, but their postures alert, their movements fluid like the desert wind, their gazes darting to every shadow, every ripple in the sand. The scout, still bound with a leather strap around his wrists, stumbled behind, his face pale with exhaustion and fear, his earlier defiance replaced by the stark reality of his captivity. His boots dragged in the sand, leaving uneven tracks that marked their path toward the canyon. 3 days' ride from the Gulch where they'd left Ward's body to the flood's merciless embrace. "We're close," Nita said, her voice steady. Despite the strain that tightened her throat, the words carrying a weight of hope she dared not fully voice. She paused, shading her eyes with a hand to peer at the canyon's dark entrance, its shadows deepening as the sun climbed higher. The contrast between light and dark, a stark reminder of the refuge and peril that awaited. Alila knows these lands better than anyone. If she's alive, she'll be waiting near the old waterhole where the pines grow thick and the rocks hide her from the wind. Jacob nodded, his mind drifting to the ledger-rolled parchment that held proof of Ward's crimes, a weapon against the powerful men who had orchestrated the massacres of Navajo villages, the burning of homes, the slaughter of innocents. The thought of it fueled his steps. A fire stoked by the memory of the night his own family had been taking, Clara's laughter silenced. Lily's small hand slipping from his allos that had driven him into the desert's solitude. But the scout's warning from the gulch echoed in his ears. A chilling refrain. Trackers and worse were on their trail. Men hired by Ward's masters to erase the evidence and silence its bearers. Their reach extending beyond the grave of their fallen leader. He glanced back. The desert empty, but for the wind stirring the sand into faint, shifting patterns, a canvas of nature that hid their pursuers too well. "We need to move faster," he said, his voice rough with the dust that coated his throat. The words scraping against his dry lips. "We'll catch our scent soon, blood, smoke, or tracks. Can't afford to linger." The group pressed on, the canyon's shadow growing larger with each step, its walls rising like the jaws of a beast, ready to swallow them whole. The sandstone glowing a warm amber under the sun's relentless gaze. The air cooled slightly as they neared, carrying the faint scent of pine from hidden crevices where moisture clung to life, a whisper of green amid the arid wasteland. The sun beat down, its rays reflecting off the rock faces, casting a golden haze that blurred the edges of the landscape, turning the distant peaks into mirages that shimmered and danced. Jacob's shoulder ached with every movement. The bullet grazed a constant throb that pulsed in time with his heartbeat. But he pushed the pain aside, focusing on the path ahead, the weight of his rifle a grounding force. Nita matched his pace. Her limp less pronounced now, her determination a mirror to his own, her presence a steadying anchor in the storm of their journey. Suddenly, a sharp whistle cut through the silence, a high, clear note that seemed to dance on the wind, a sound both familiar and foreign in the desert's stillness. Nita's eyes widened, hope flaring like a spark in the desert dusk. A light that banished the shadows from her face for a fleeting moment. "Lila," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. The single word carrying the weight of years apart, of fear and longing. She quickened her step, ignoring the twinge in her leg. Her gaze fixed on the canyon's mouth where the sound had originated. Her heart pounding with the possibility of reunion. A figure emerged from the shadows, a young Navajo woman, her face a mirror to Nita's, her features softened by youth but hardened by survival, a reflection of the same fierce spirit that burned in her sister's eyes. Her dress, once vibrant with traditional patterns of red and black, was tattered. The edges frayed from days of flight, the fabric clinging to her slender frame like a second skin. In her hands she clutched a rolled parchment, the map and ledger, held tightly against her chest as if it were her lifeline, the paper crinkling softly with each breath she took. "Sister," Nita cried, rushing forward, her arms opening wide, her voice breaking with the joy and relief that flooded her soul.
"Only to freeze?"
Only to freeze as a shadow moved behind Leela, a predator stepping into the light. A man in a dark coat emerged, his face obscured by the wide brim of a black hat that cast a shadow over his features. His presence a stark contrast to the warmth of the sisters' reunion. A revolver gleamed in his hand, its barrel catching the sunlight like a predator's eye, the metal cold and unyielding. "Drop it," the man growled, his voice cold and devoid of mercy, the words slicing through the tension like a knife, his finger hovering near the trigger with a steadiness that spoke of experience. Jacob raised his rifle in an instant, the stock pressing against his shoulder, the familiar weight grounding him as his finger curled around the trigger, his green eyes narrowing with intent. But before he could fire, Tala and Kiona darted forward. With the speed of desert hawks, their daggers flashing in the sunlight, the blades catching the golden rays like shards of glass. The man swung his revolver toward them, firing a shot that echoed off the canyon walls with a deafening crack. The bullet missing as it buried itself in the sand with a soft thud, sending a puff of dust into the air. Tala tackled him, her lithe form driving him to the ground with a thud that reverberated through the earth, her weight pinning him as she wrestled for control. Kiona disarmed him, her dagger pressing against his wrist with a precision that forced a grunt from his lips. The revolver skittering across the sand, glinting as it came to rest near a boulder. Its barrel pointed skyward. Lila ran to Nita, the parchment still clutched in her hands, tears streaking her dust-covered face as she threw her arms around her sister, the embrace a collision of relief and sorrow. "I thought you were dead," she sobbed, her voice muffled against Nita's shoulder. The words trembling with the weight of her fear. Nita held her tightly, her own eyes glistening with unshed tears, her arms wrapping around Lila with a fierceness that spoke of years apart. "We're here now," she murmured, her voice steady despite the emotion that threatened to overwhelm her. "The ledger's safe." Jacob pinned the man down, his knee pressing into the tracker's chest with a force that drew a sharp intake of breath, the rifle now aimed at his head, the barrel steady despite the sweat that beaded on his brow. "Who is he?" he demanded, his voice a low growl, the anger simmering beneath his calm exterior, a volcano poised to erupt. "A tracker." Lila gasped, pulling back from Nita to wipe her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving streaks of dust on her cheeks, sent by Ward's masters. "They know we're alive. Someone saw the flood and reported back a rider who escaped the waters." The man smirked, despite the dagger at his throat and the weight of Jacob's knee, his lips curling with a defiance that bordered on madness. "You're dead already," he spat, his voice hoarse, the words laced with a venom that chilled the air. "More are coming, men who don't negotiate. The ledger's a death sentence, and you're all marked, every last one of you." Jacob's grip tightened on the rifle, his mind racing with the implications, the threat of Ward's successors looming larger than ever, shadow cast by men with power and wealth beyond his imagining, cimators, railroad barons, tycoons who pulled strings. From distant cities, he glanced at Nita, their eyes meeting across the distance, a silent agreement forming in that shared gaze. Her strength bolstering his, a partnership forged in the fires of battle. "You need to get to safety," he said, his voice steady, "a anchor in the storm. Read the ledger, find their names." Lila unrolled the parchment, her fingers trembling as she traced the faded ink. The paper crackling softly in the still air, the sound a whisper against the canyon's silence. "Senators, railroad barons' names I've heard, whispered in fear," she said, her voice growing firmer with each word, the weight of revelation steadying her hands. "Harrington, Voss, Caldwell. They paid Ward to clear our land, to build their tracks and mines, to bury our people under their progress. This lists every crime, every village burned, every life taken." Nita took the ledger, her resolve hardening. As she scanned the names, the ink blurring slightly under her touch, a testament to the tears she refused to shed.
Ow.
"These men will stop at nothing," she said, her voice a blade of steel. "We have to use this against them. Bring them to justice." As she spoke, a distant rumble shook the ground, a vibration that traveled up Jacob's legs and into his chest, a precursor to the storm they could not outrun. He climbed a nearby rock, shading his eyes against the sun's glare, the heat searing his skin as he spotted a dust cloud on the horizon, growing larger with each passing second, a harbinger of death. "Riders," he warned, his voice sharp, cutting through the tension like a whip. "At least 10, maybe more, closing fast." Nita's hand tightened on the ledger, her fingers whitening around the edges, her eyes narrowing with a determination that mirrored the canyon's unyielding walls. "We fight or we die," she said, her voice a declaration of war. "This ends here." They took cover among the canyon's boulders, the women positioning themselves with weapons ready there. Movements, a choreography of survival. Shima's bow sang, the first arrow streaking through the air with a soft whistle, striking a rider's shoulder and forcing him to veer off course, his horse rearing in protest, its hooves kicking up a cloud of golden dust. Tala and Kiona moved, like phantoms, their daggers flashing as they struck from the shadows, their blades finding marks with silent precision, the steel glinting in the fading light. Jacob fired his rifle, each shot a calculated strike, the reports echoing off the canyon walls, a symphony of defiance that thinned the enemy ranks as riders fell one by one, their bodies crumpling into the sand. But the numbers were against them, a tide that threatened to overwhelm their fragile stand. A bullet grazed Jacob's arm, a hot sting that drew a hiss from his lips, the pain a sharp counterpoint to the adrenaline coursing through his veins. Nita pulled him behind a rock, her hand steadying him as she pressed against his side. Her touch firm, a fleeting comfort in the chaos, her breath warm against his ear. "We can't win this," she said, her voice low and urgent, the words. A confession born of necessity. But we can outlast them, a plan formed in Jacob's mind. A spark of strategy ignited by the canyon's natural defenses lured the riders into a narrow pass where the walls would bottleneck them, turning their numbers into a disadvantage, a trap set by the land itself. He signaled the women, his hand cutting through the air with a sharp gesture. The motion crisp despite the sweat that slicked his palm, and they retreated, drawing the enemy deeper into the canyon. The pass loomed ahead, its walls tightening. Like a vice, the air growing cooler as the sunlight dimmed, the shadows lengthening with the sun's descent. Jacob set a trap, rolling a boulder with Tal's help, stone grinding against the ground with a rumble that masked their movements, the dust rising in a choking cloud that obscured their retreat. The riders charged into the choke point there. Horses' hooves thundering against the sand, a drumbeat of war that reverberated through the canyon. Shima's arrows rained down, each shot a deadly melody that felled a rider, her hand steady, despite the trembling of her years, the fletching glinting in the fading light. Tala and Kiona emerged from the sides, their daggers flashing in the dimness, striking with ruthless efficiency as the riders struggled to maneuver, their blades finding flesh with a soft thud. Jacob's rifle barked, each shot a precise counter to the enemy's advance, the canyon amplifying the sound into a cacophony of war. The echoes bouncing off the walls like a chorus of defiance. But the leader, a tall man with a scar across his cheek and a cold glint in his eye, broke through, his horse charging toward Nita with unrelenting speed, its mane whipping in the wind, its eyes wild with the scent of battle. Nita stood her ground, her dagger raised, her stance a blend of defiance and desperation, her body coiled like a spring ready to release. But Jacob intercepted, tackling the man from his saddle with a force that sent them both crashing to the sand, the impact jarring his bones, the breath knocked from his lungs. They grappled, the man's strength matching Jacob's fists, pounding against Jacob's ribs with a rhythm that echoed the hoofbeats. The dust rising in a choking cloud that blurred their forms. Nita's dagger found the man's leg, the blade sinking just enough to force a cry from his lips, a sharp note of pain that cut through the din. And he yielded, collapsing under Jacob's weight, his breath ragged, his struggle ceasing. The remaining riders, seeing their leader fall, turned and fled, their hoofbeats fading into the distance as the canyon fell silent once more, the echoes dying away like the last notes of a mournful song. Jacob and Nita leaned against a boulder, breathless, the ledger safe in Leela's hands as she joined them, her eyes wide with relief. The parchment clutched against her chest like a shield. Nita's hand lingered on Jacob's arm, her touch warmth that steadied his racing heart, her fingers brushing against the graze on his skin. A gentle pressure that spoke of gratitude and something more. "We did it," she whispered, a faint smile breaking through her exhaustion, her dark eyes reflecting the canyon's shadows, a depth that drew him in. "For now," Jacob replied, his voice soft, rough with emotion, the words carrying the weight of the battles yet to come. He looked at her, the sunlight catching the lines of her face, tracing the curve of her cheek with a tenderness he hadn't felt in years, and felt a pull, a connection that transcended the battle, a promise of something yet to come, a flame that flickered in the darkness of his soul. But this war is just beginning. Episode 4 End. Echoes of Power. Episode 4 brings Jacob and Nita to the canyon, reuniting with Lila and securing the ledger. But new trackers from Ward's Masters threaten their quest. Who are the powerful men behind the massacres and can love blossom amid the shadows? Tune in for episode 5 to uncover the ledger's full secrets. If you're hooked on this saga, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to catch every thrilling moment. Share your theories on the trackers in the comments below.